A cab pulled up before a realtor's office. A middle-aged woman with a thin build emerged from it and headed to the door with a suitcase as the cab pulled away from the building. She opened the building's door and saw a familiar face walking away from a copier. "Oh, my God, Steve. I can't believe how you look," Mary Ellen exclaimed as she caught her first glimpse of her brother-in-law in 5 years. "I'm not sure how I should take that," Steve answered as he put down the papers in his hand. "You should take it as a compliment. If Joyce hadn't tipped me off about what had gone on between you two, I never would have been able to tell it was you unless I really gave you a good look." "So you think I'm noticeable?" Steve asked. I guess you're asking if I could tell if you're a guy beneath it all," Mary Ellen said as she looked closely at the clothes her brother-in-law was wearing. Her eyes examined him from head to toe. She looked at his black, opaque tights-covered legs that seemed to be at first surprisingly shapely, but then she realized that he had always been of a modest build. She felt that his 5 feet 8 inches height worked to further lend his legs a long and lust-worthy appearance. Her eyes then drifted down to the large lady's heels that rested on his disproportionately large feet. The 4-inch height of the glittery, gold-colored pumps and rounded toe helped to diminish the apparent length of his feet. "Yes, I want to know," Steve replied. "Since I know you, I would have been able to tell upon close inspection." "If I didn't, there's no way," Mary Ellen interjected as she continued to look over her brother-in-law's outfit. Her eyes moved up his legs and to the skirt suit that rested on his body. The pleat skirt's hem fell just above Steve's knees. Her eyes worked their way up to the skirt's matching black jacket, which had a notched collar and black buttons. Steve smiled at her words and said, "Thank you." Steve had never been found out by a stranger yet, and Mary Ellen's words gave him even further confidence about the believability of his feminine appearance. "I just can't believe it that this is you, Steve," Mary Ellen responded as her eyes fixated on the blouse that was visible beneath Steve's open jacket. It was a black and gold floral print blouse with a ruffled V neckline and a black bow detail at the waist. "Well, I'm not surprised by that. I mean, I couldn't at first either. Tell me what happened, Steve. How did this happen to you?" Mary Ellen asked with a smile. "Joyce didn't tell you?" "Well, she told me, but I want to hear it from you." Steve motioned for Mary Ellen to take a seat on the couch. She sat and was quickly joined by Steve. Steve looked her in the eyes and said, "It's a complicated story." "I have time to hear it," Mary Ellen replied with a grin. "Let me start from the beginning. You know, I was working down at my old office for 20 years out of college. I had become a manager, but times got tough, and I was only a middle manager. We were the first to go at the company when they streamlined the chain of command. After that, I found myself unemployed for 6 months. I was going crazy at home. I picked up your sister's chores, but that was not enough to fill my days. It wasn't very fulfilling either. I wouldn't imagine it would be for you." "You've always been so productive," Mary Ellen interjected. Steve nodded before he continued, "I tried to make it palatable to me. I worked at making it a little game for myself. I took some advantage of the situation and started wearing my Andy clothes." "Andy? That's what you go by? It's a little masculine sounding, don't you think?" Mary Ellen declared. Stephen answered, "That's why I choose it. There's some girls out there with the name, but it's not too girly. I went with the name originally to try to appease your sister. You know, she's always been accepting of this side of me, but she never fully embraced it. I always felt that the name kind of gave her a little help understanding that I was still a man underneath the clothes." "I guess that's understandable," Mary Ellen replied. Steve replied, "Well, anyway, I started dressing up around the house. I was cleaning it in my older girl's clothes, and I was cooking Joyce dinner in them. Eventually, I got a little cocky." "What did you do?" Mary Ellen asked. Steve smiled as he answered, "I decided to go food shopping as Andy." "How did that go?" Mary Ellen inquired. "How do you think?" Steve answered as he pointed at his blouse. Passed without incident, Mary Ellen said. Steve nodded and said, I walked into that store wearing simple, plain black pants, a plain black blouse, and some low black heels. I paired it all with a red jacket that I thought made myself look a little sporty. I knew the blazer was kind of loud and announced my presence when I probably should have been trying to be inconspicuous, but I couldn't resist it at the time. Even though looking back on it, I'm surprised I didn't put on something that would blend into the background a little more. Somehow it worked with my hair, at least I thought so. I had brushed my hair out and tried to give myself that short-haired Hilary Swank look. Did that work for you? A little. I wasn't very enthused with the look, but I had shorter hair then. So, I had to make do with what I had. Well, I like what you did with it, now. Yes, I like it too. It's still on the short side, but it's not too short. I mean, it's above the shoulder, which I think is right for a girl my age, but it's still feminine. I think it's cute, and it fits a girl your age, Joyce replied with a laugh. Steve rolled his eyes and responded, thanks. Well, anyway, I went out with my shorter hair 6 months ago, in full makeup and walked down those aisles. I didn't turn a head. I figured that at least someone would notice that I wasn't like all those housewives walking through the store. I was sure that I must look a little manly even though I was dressed more femininely than any of the real women there. But no one did, Mary Ellen interjected. Steve nodded as he replied, not a one. I picked up everything on that list Joyce left for me and brought it up to the counter. I looked at the cashier. I expected the girl would at least realize that I was a guy. She was the first person besides my wife who had ever seen me up close and femme. I was sure that the illusion of femininity I was giving off would crumble at close glance, but it didn't. I was in shock as the girl just took the money from me and wished me a good day after she rang me up like I was any other customer. I walked out of the store with my life feeling turned upside down. I had lived as a man because I felt that I would never pass for a woman, in part. The rest is obvious. I didn't want to lose your sister, so I knew that I'd still have to restrict my cross-dressing. That was until I came home. As I started unpacking the bags from the trunk, your sister pulled up. I was in shock. I stared at her like a deer caught in the headlights. I just froze up in panic. She never came home during the day, but that day she did. I knew I had bad luck in life, but seeing her made me feel like nothing could ever go right for me. What did she say? Mary Ellen asked. Steve shrugged and said, at first nothing. She just looked at me from the car for a few moments. There wasn't an expression on her face. She knew I had dressed before. She had seen me. I had done it around her more than a few times, but she had never seen me dressed up in full view of the neighbors and strangers. She got out of the car and took in some of the packages. I followed quickly behind her with the rest. I tried to explain myself. I didn't bother to lie. I told her what I had been doing at home and how I was trying to make it all tolerable. She laughed at me. She said, tolerable? You enjoy it. Who are you kidding? Was she right? Mary Ellen interjected with a smirk. Steve shook his head and said, half right. I didn't care much for the cleaning and the shopping, but I did love the dressing that went along with it. It really was more than tolerable for me. I enjoyed it. She knew that. That's why she looked at me and asked me, are you even trying to find a job? I knew where she was going. She was not sure that I would voluntarily give up a situation that enabled me to wear women's pants in public and a house dress. I pled my case and said that I had been working real hard to find a job. She knew how many resumes and cover letters I had made up and put out there. Still, nothing seemed forthcoming. That's when she asked, right? Mary Ellen inquired. Steve leaned back in his seat and crossed his legs. He then leaned towards Mary Ellen and said, yes. She looked me over. She saw the clothing I was wearing, the pants, blouse and blazer thing, and asked me if I could come along to a home showing she was doing that afternoon. And you said yes, Mary Ellen replied with a laugh. Not at first, Steve countered. Why not? Male ego is my best guess. I was still high from passing in the store. There was no real reason that I would turn the chance to try to pass some more except for the fear that doing so would show Joyce that I was not really a man, I suppose. It seems kind of stupid to think that, seeing as she's seen me wear a dress a number of times, but it felt kind of different at that moment. What changed your mind? Mary Ellen asked. She looked at me and said that she needed the help. She really asked me to go along. She told me that I was passable. She reassured me of that even though I didn't need it. I was certain that I looked girly. Not that I thought that was anything to be proud of. Still, she asked me so nicely that I had to consider it. She seemed genuinely warm to the idea of seeing me in that outfit when she asked. You couldn't say no? How could I? Well, I know my husband would have. Yes, but Johnny's not like me. Oh, I know that, but that handsome devil would never look as pretty as you do. Steve blushed and answered, that's probably something he'd be happy about. I'm sure it is. You know he's a tough guy. Yes, we're polar opposites. That's true, but that's probably why my sister went for you. She's the exact opposite of me as well, so it makes sense that we married two people that were so different. Steve noticed Mary Ellen's conscious use of the word people in place of men. He asked, why did you say that you and your sister married two different people and not men? Mary Ellen's smile went away. She pulled her lips into her mouth before she answered, I don't mean any offense by it, Andy. Andy? Well, it's the name more suited for you when you're dressed like that. Steve accepted her explanation and said, well, what did you mean by it then? Well, you know, you're not really a guy. What am I then? Steve asked with a huff. Mary Ellen blushed and said, you know. Steve blushed as well as he realized what his wife's sister thought of him. He knew he could not change her mind and that he had to get along with her for his wife's sake. Consequently, he continued, it doesn't matter. Whatever you think I am, the story goes the same. Your sister got me to go along with her to the home showing. I drove my car behind her, and we waited in the house for the prospective buyers. What did they say when they saw you? The woman said I looked nice. I complimented her back, and we went on our way into the house. What did you do? Mary Ellen asked. I just helped out your sister. I walked beside her as she described the house to the couple. Joyce had me get the wife a cup of water. I would try to sell the house with her by giving my little asides about things. The wife seemed to like hearing my opinion, but her husband really could have done without it. Then they left, and eventually they made a call about the house. They decided to buy it. It took a little negotiation with the owners, but they got it. What did Joyce have to say about you assisting her? She didn't really say anything. She thanked me and said I did a good job, but that was all. I knew I was there to make her job easier and assist her, and that's what I did. Did you like doing it? Mary Ellen asked. When I was doing it, yes. Afterwards, I was a bit torn. It made me feel a bit strange to be passing as a woman when I was in such close contact with these strangers. How did it make you feel? It made me feel good about my appearance. I guess I felt a bit pretty at the time, so that made me smile, but that smile quickly went away. I just got a thought at that moment that I shouldn't want to be pretty. I know I'm not really pretty. Don't be so hard on yourself, girl, Mary Ellen interjected. Steve smiled and continued, thanks, but anyway, I knew that a man should not want to be pretty or even cute. I knew that men didn't want that. I started calling myself a fag in my head, repeatedly. I'm not gay or anything, but I couldn't help but to think. I kind of felt that by enjoying my femininity I was betraying my manliness, whatever amount of that I ever really had. I figured that the happiness I felt en femme meant that I wasn't really a man, so I concluded that I had to be what society thought that men that dress up are. I felt that, despite how much I love the feeling of a woman's clothing on my skin. The silkiness, the softness, it just can't be topped or rivaled by anything in the men's department. Even though heels are bitch, I still love the way look on me. The pain is definitely worth it. But as much as I enjoyed dressing up and passing myself off as a woman when I was doing it, I found myself immediately ashamed that I had done so after it. I felt that the desires I had were unnatural and that I should be ashamed of myself for embracing them. I guess I've come to terms with it since, but right then I was consumed by self-hatred. I could feel that loathing the moment the couple pulled out of the driveway. I knew what I was. I knew what my feelings meant. I wasn't really prepared to handle it. Mary Ellen began to feel uncomfortable. She decided to change the subject by asking, "What did you and my sister do when the couple left?" Steve answered, "We parted ways after the couple left, and I went home. I made her dinner and was still dressed in the outfit when she came home. I didn't change despite my feelings because I felt that I was kind of punishing myself by making myself be seen en femme by wife once more. I figured that even though she was outwardly comfortable with it, she wasn't internally happy about how I looked. I guess I figured that I was punishing myself by making myself look bad in front of her. It didn't quite go that way though. Joyce came home, and she sat down at the table I sat, and we shared a meal together without her even mentioning that I was still dressed as a woman. We just talked about the home showing. After we finished, I cleaned off the table and joined her in the living room. Before I could even sit down, Joyce looked at me and said, "I have a proposition for you." I was intrigued, so I asked what she had in mind. That's when she told me about this job. Wow. My sister moves quick when she wants to do something. Doesn't she? Mary Ellen asked. Yes, she's always been aggressive like that. You're telling me. She used to boss me around when we were kids. I'm glad I'm not the only one that's experienced it. Steve smiled as he looked around the office staffed with realtors that worked for his wife. He looked Mary Ellen in the eye and said, "Everyone in this building has experienced it." Mary Ellen laughed for a second before Steve continued, "I learned that not long after I got here. Joyce told me about how she rode certain people here before, but I never realized how domineering she could be when she dropped that smile that made me think that we were playing a game when we were at home. I got that smile, her employees didn't. With me, I feel that I'm playing along to make her happy, but these workers, here, play along because they don't want to cross her." "Is that why the job was here for you?" Mary Ellen asked. "No. She had a receptionist here who already had one kid, and she got knocked up again. She had to quit to take care of her 2 kids. The cost of childcare for both was going to be too much for the girl to justify continuing to come to work." "Well, why did Joyce want you to do the job?" "That's what I never got." Steve answered, "I needed a job. She had an opening." "That's not what I mean, Andy. Why would she bring you to her job en femme? She could have just as easily had you come in as a male receptionist." "I mean, granted that might look a little strange." "Yes, but she knew that that would be no fun for me. As far as why she hired me in the first place, the short answer really is that she wanted to keep the pay in the family. I don't make much, but it pays our grocery bill for the month with a little left over for me to buy some clothes and makeup for myself. If you don't mind my asking, why did you take the job?" Steve smirked and answered, "I love looking like this, Mary Ellen. Joyce giving me this option was like a person giving an addict their drug of choice. Joyce opened up an opportunity that she knew that I would exploit. I could pretend to be not interested, but Joyce knew that such an act would fall apart quick. My self-hatred about my cross-dressing never wins out for long. I run from it, but I always end up in a skirt again. Desire always overcomes denial, given enough time." Mary Ellen nodded and asked, "Do the others know who you really are?" "Oh, yes. They all met me when I used to come to the office Christmas party. They've seen me in my old male clothing. There was little hope of hiding my true identity. It's not like a comic book where if I took it off or put on a pair of glasses no one would realize who I really was. What was it like when she told her employees? She told them before I started. Your sister said that they were all accepting of my life choice. I didn't really buy that until I showed up. I got a few amused looks the first couple of days and the occasional gentle ribbing about what I was doing, but that was it. The people here are either really open-minded or just scarred to death of your sister. I haven't figured out which one it is yet. Mary Ellen. Steve then heard from behind him. Hey, sis, Mary Ellen said as she stood up and embraced Joyce. I see you've met my new and improved husband. Yes. Andy's been filling me in on what you two have been up to. I'm glad. I hope he's entertaining you because I have just a little more work to do here before I can really talk. Oh, take your time, sis. Andy, please get me a soda. Is there anything you want, Mary Ellen? No. I'm good. Steve turned away from Mary Ellen and Joyce so he could get his wife a soda from the break room refrigerator. He carried it back and handed it to her as she finished hearing about how Mary Ellen's flight was. Joyce smiled at Mary Ellen and Steve and said, I'll be back shortly. Don't rush, Mary Ellen responded as she sat back down. She then patted on the couch after her eyes turned to Steve. Steve sat down once more, and Mary Ellen asked, Well, what was that about? What, getting her the soda? Steve inquired. Mary Ellen nodded. Steve responded, It's part of the job. She makes you do little things for her like you're her secretary, dear? I wouldn't put it that way. I'm technically the office receptionist, and I work at home showings as her assistant. I knew about that, but your receptionist job seems a little like a secretary's, Andy. Well, they're really not that different. I'd say that my job really is an enhanced version of a secretary's job. What exactly does my sister have you doing around here? Mary Ellen inquired with a smile. A little of this and that. What exactly does that entail? Steve shrugged and said, Normal receptionist work. I handle the calls coming into the office and transfer them over to Joyce or one of the realtors when I'm here. I also help out the staff. I do some photocopying and faxing for them. I call up real estate lawyers' offices for them to see how title reports are going and such. What about fetching soda? Mary Ellen asked with a grin. Steve blushed and said, I only do that for Joyce, usually. Usually? Well, it's not really in my job description, but if someone asks me for a soda, or water, or coffee, tea, or what have you, I figure I should get it for them. I want to help them out. The more time they're working, the more money they're probably bringing into the office. My sister doesn't make you do it? No. I do it on my own. I want to help out. The better the office does, the better it is for Joyce. Which means the better it is for you. Yes, she's happier then, so that makes it easier on me. Is that all do you? Mary Ellen inquired. No. I go to home showings with Joyce. I play the part of her assistant during walkthroughs. How do you like it? I like doing it. I get to spend more time with Joyce, and it's better than sitting around the house all day doing nothing. But you're not responsible for things like you used to be. You used to order people around and had some control over your life. Yes, that was all right too. But you like this better, don't you? Steve blushed and shook his head. Oh, come on, Andy. Just between us girls, you prefer being on the bottom. You like being told what to do. You like my sister holding all the cards. Steve continued to blush as he slowly nodded. Oh, Johnny will love to hear that. Mary Ellen exclaimed. Steve rolled his eyes as he thought about what his brother-in-law must think about what he was doing. His head then turned towards Joyce's office door as he saw it open. He watched his wife walk out. She came over to the couch and said, Are you two ready to go? Mary Ellen nodded and said, Yes, but you really don't have to leave early on my part. I can wait. Nonsense. I cut out early on Fridays sometime anyway. Besides, I want to give Andy time to make a 3-course meal for us. Oh, Andy's cooking tonight? A good wife always cooks for her lover's guest, Joyce replied. Mary Ellen clutched her purse while Steve stood and picked up her suitcase in one hand and his black purse in the other. As they headed out the door, Mary Ellen asked, "So, sis, you consider Andy to be your wife, now?" 95% of the time Andy is Mrs. Smith in our household, Joyce answered as she opened up the driver's side door and opened the trunk. Steve put Mary Ellen's bag into the trunk while she took a seat in the passenger seat. Having no alternative, Steve slid himself into the back seat of the car he once customarily drove. He had always liked to drive, but Joyce now insisted that she drive whenever they were together. Steve felt he had no choice but to accept her decision. Steve listened as the two women caught up in the front seats. As they chatted, his mind quickly drifted to how he would prepare the meal he would make for them.